We exposes explained. The terrifying moment a man discovers he has a soul in a world built to destroy it. We turns a perfect society into a glass prison. Yevgeny Zamyatin's We begins with a terrifying idea. What if the future did not destroy humanity through chaos, war, poverty, or collapse, but through perfect order? The citizens of the one state do not live like people. They live like calculations. They wake at the same time, march at the same time, work at the same time, eat at the same time, have approved sex at the same time, and praise their ruler as though obedience were happiness. Then one man begins to malfunction. That man is D-503, a brilliant engineer helping build a spacecraft called the Integral. Its mission is not exploration in the heroic sense. It is colonization by ideology. The one state wants to carry its mathematical tyranny beyond Earth and bring every unknown civilization into the same controlled system. The danger begins when D-503 meets I-330, a woman who does not fit the equation. She smokes, drinks, lies, seduces, mocks, disappears, reappears, and speaks as though freedom is not a disease, but a buried human instinct. The central question of we is brutal. If a man has been trained to believe obedience is happiness, what happens when desire teaches him that he is alive? Book covered. We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. The novel was written in the early 1920s and first published in English in 1924. Britannica describes it as one of the foundational dystopian works, with later novels such as Brave New World and 1984 often discussed in relation to it. The big idea of the book. We is about a society that has solved suffering by abolishing the individual. In the one state, privacy is treated as suspicious, imagination as illness, nature as savagery, and freedom as primitive confusion. Every citizen is no longer a person with a name, history, and inner life. Each is a number. Zamyatin's deepest idea is that total control does not merely imprison people from the outside. It teaches them to police themselves from within. The horror is not only that the state watches D-503. The horror is that D-503 begins the story wanting to be watched. The plot in one flow. The story is told through the records of D-503, a mathematician and engineer who lives in the one state, a future society built almost entirely from glass. Buildings, rooms, streets, and public life are designed around visibility. The purpose is simple. If everyone can be seen, everyone can be controlled. D-503 is proud of this world. He does not see it as oppression. He sees it as civilization perfected. His city is separated from the wild outside by the green wall, a barrier that divides the one state from nature. Inside the wall there is symmetry, surveillance, regulation, schedules, and mathematical order. Outside the wall there are trees, animals, instincts, uncertainty, and the ancient disorder the state claims to have overcome. D-503's life is governed by the table of hours, the official schedule that dictates almost every part of existence. Citizens wake, work, walk, eat, attend lectures, and sleep according to a shared timetable. Individual spontaneity is not admired. It is treated as a crack in the system. This world even controls sex. Citizens can apply for regulated sexual visits with one another, using official permissions. Intimacy is not private love. It is administered release. Desire is reduced to paperwork. D-503 accepts all of this not with resentment, but reverence. He believes the one state has rescued humanity from the chaos of freedom. To him, mathematical order is beautiful. Happiness means certainty. Duty means sanity. He is especially proud because he is helping build the Integral, a spacecraft designed to spread the one state's logic beyond Earth. The mission is imperial and ideological. The state does not merely want to rule its own citizens. It wants to export obedience to the universe. At the beginning, D-503 writes his records as a kind of tribute. He imagines them being carried aboard the integral to other worlds. His writing is meant to prove the glory of the one state. Instead, it becomes a record of his collapse. D503's controlled life includes O90, a soft, affectionate woman who loves him with genuine warmth. She is rounded, emotionally open, and vulnerable in a world that prefers straight lines. O wants closeness, not merely scheduled sex. She wants a child. But the state forbids her from motherhood because she does not meet its physical requirements. That detail matters. In this world, even reproduction belongs to the state. A woman's desire to become a mother is not treated as sacred, private, or human. It is treated as a biological matter to be approved or denied by authority. D503 also has a friend, R13, a poet who writes official verse for the state. R13 gives the impression of personality, humor, and artistic energy, but even art has been absorbed into propaganda. His creativity exists only within permitted ideological limits. Then D503 meets I330. She immediately disrupts him. I330 is sharp, sensual, unpredictable, and dangerous. She has the confidence of someone who knows the rules, but does not spiritually submit to them. She laughs at things D503 treats as sacred. She asks questions that make him uncomfortable. She behaves as if the one state's perfection is not perfection at all. D503 is fascinated and alarmed. He cannot process her through his usual mathematical categories. She is not orderly. She is not transparent. She does not soothe him. She disturbs him. Their connection begins as irritation, but it quickly becomes obsession. D503 notices her body, her gestures, her defiance, her strangeness. He starts to experience desire, not as a regulated function, but as a private force. That is the beginning of his internal rebellion. I330 takes him to the ancient house, a preserved building from the old world. This place is crucial because it contains the texture of the past: opaque rooms, old objects, colors, disorder, secrecy, and human history. To D503, it is almost obscene. It belongs to a world before total rationalization. The ancient house is not just a setting. It is the first crack in the glass. Inside it, D503 encounters an atmosphere the one state has tried to erase. There is mystery there. There are hidden rooms, curtains, irregular spaces, and traces of lives that were not fully visible to authority. It suggests that humanity once lived in ways that could not be reduced to tables, formulas, and surveillance. I330 also introduces him to forbidden pleasures. She smokes and drinks alcohol, both illegal. D503 is shocked, but his horror is mixed with attraction. His language becomes unstable. His thoughts become fragmented. He starts to describe himself as if he is ill. In the logic of the one state, he is ill. What he calls illness is actually awakening. As D503 becomes more entangled with I330, his relationship with O90 becomes more painful. O loves him sincerely. She is not a revolutionary figure like I330, but she is deeply human. Her longing for a child is one of the novel's clearest emotional wounds. O's tragedy is that she wants something simple and ancient, to love, to be loved, and to create life. But in the one state, simple human longing becomes illegal if it does not fit the system. D503 is divided between O's tenderness and I330's danger. O represents affection, domestic longing, and emotional need. I330 represents rebellion, seduction, and spiritual rupture. Neither woman is merely a romantic option. Each exposes a different part of D503 that the state has tried to suppress. His mind begins to split. He still believes in the one state. He still admires the benefactor, the ruler who presides over society like a god of rational control. He still tries to understand his feelings as errors, infections, or irrational deviations, but he cannot return to his previous simplicity. Once he has experienced desire, secrecy, jealousy, fear, and longing, the old mathematical worldview no longer holds. This is where we becomes psychologically powerful. D503 does not instantly become a heroic rebel. He does not suddenly understand freedom. He does not calmly reject tyranny. He panics. He wants I-330, but he fears what wanting her means. He is drawn to rebellion, but he still craves the safety of obedience. He experiences his inner life as a threat because he has been trained to believe that inner life itself is dangerous. The one state's power is not just political. It has colonized his vocabulary. When D503 feels alive, he thinks he is diseased. As the story escalates, D503 learns that I-330 is connected to a revolutionary group called Mephi. The name evokes Mephistopheles, the tempter figure, and that association matters. To the one state, rebels are demonic because they tempt citizens away from rational paradise. But the novel complicates this. If the state's paradise is a prison, then temptation may be the beginning of liberation. Mephi operates beyond and beneath the visible order of the one state. Its members want to bring down the regime, break the sealed structure of control, and reconnect human beings with the wildness outside the green wall. That wildness is not simply nature. It is everything the state cannot calculate. Instinct, risk, imagination, love, danger, birth, death, and freedom. I-330's interest in D503 is not purely romantic. This is one of the story's hardest emotional turns. She wants him, but she also needs him because of his connection to the integral. As the spacecraft's builder, he is valuable to the rebellion. If Mephi can seize the integral, they can turn the state's own weapon against it. D503 slowly realizes that he may not simply be loved. He may be used. That ambiguity is central to the book's emotional pressure. I-330 may care for him, but she is also strategic. She awakens him, but she also manipulates him. She gives him access to freedom, but freedom arrives through deception, seduction, and danger. D503 is not equipped to handle this complexity. The one state has raised him for certainty. I-330 brings contradiction. Meanwhile, the state continues its public rituals of control. The most important is the Day of Unanimity, an election ritual in which citizens publicly affirm the benefactor's rule. It is not a real election. It is a performance of total agreement. The point is not to choose. The point is to demonstrate that no meaningful choice exists. D503 expects unanimity because unanimity is the emotional grammar of his world. But cracks appear. Some citizens dissent. The mere possibility of disagreement is shocking because the state's power depends on the appearance that everyone is fused into one collective will. This matters because tyranny does not only require obedience. It requires the theatre of consent. If everyone appears to agree, each individual feels isolated in doubt. But once dissent becomes visible, doubt becomes contagious. The one state responds as authoritarian systems do. It intensifies control and reframes inner life as sickness. The authorities announce the Great Operation, a surgical procedure designed to remove imagination. In the one state's logic, imagination is the root of unhappiness. If people imagine alternatives, they suffer. If they desire what is forbidden, they suffer. If they dream, doubt, love, or rebel, they suffer. So the state proposes a cure. Cut out the faculty that makes freedom possible. This is one of the most terrifying ideas in the novel. The regime does not merely punish rebellion, it medicalizes the soul. D503's own crisis deepens. He has dreams which horrify him because dreams are signs of imagination. He becomes jealous, irrational, unstable, and emotionally exposed. He cannot fit himself back into the machine. The more he wants I-330, the more he fears her. The more he fears the state, the more he wants its certainty. He is caught between two forms of terror: the terror of being controlled and the terror of being free. O90's pregnancy becomes another major turning point. Because she is not authorized to bear children, her pregnancy places her in mortal danger. The state does not treat the unborn child as a private miracle. It treats it as an illegal outcome. D503's role in this pregnancy forces him into a more personal form of rebellion. This is not abstract ideology anymore. O's body, O's child, and O's life are now at stake. Eventually, D503 helps O escape beyond the Green Wall. This is one of his most genuinely human acts. He may not fully understand freedom, and he may still be compromised, but in helping O and the child, he chooses life over regulation. The escape also reveals the symbolic force of the world beyond the wall. Outside is not the dead chaos the state has described. It is alive. It is strange, uncontrolled, frightening, and fertile. It contains people who live outside the one state's order. The state has lied not only about freedom, but about reality. The Green Wall was never just protection. It was a psychological border. It kept citizens from seeing that another way of life was possible. As Mayfie's plan develops, the integral becomes the center of the conflict. The state built it to expand domination. The rebels want to hijack it and use it to break that domination. D503 becomes the hinge between these futures. If he sides with Mayfie, the state's grand project may collapse. If he betrays Mayfie, the rebellion may be crushed. The tragedy is that D503 is not strong enough to become a clean revolutionary hero. His awakening is real, but incomplete. He has discovered his soul, but he has not learned how to defend it. The planned seizure of the integral becomes the novel's action climax. During the test flight, the rebellion tries to make its move. The machine that was supposed to carry the one state's ideology into the cosmos becomes the battlefield between obedience and freedom. But the plan fails. The Guardians, the state's secret police, intervene. Surveillance has already penetrated the conspiracy. D503's behavior has been watched, tracked, and interpreted. The system may have cracks, but it still has immense power. The failure of the integral plot is devastating because it shows how hard rebellion is inside a society built around visibility. The rebels have passion, secrecy, and courage, but the state has infrastructure, fear, informers, and the ability to make people doubt themselves. Then comes the breach of the Green Wall. The wall is damaged, and the outside world begins to enter. Birds appear. Nature breaks into the glass city. Disorder becomes visible. The symbolic meaning is enormous. The state's sealed universe is no longer sealed. For a moment, the future feels open. But Zamyatin does not give the reader a clean victory. This is not a comforting rebellion story where truth automatically defeats power. Instead, the one state responds with mass surgical control. Citizens undergo the great operation. Their imagination is removed. The state's answer to awakening is mutilation disguised as treatment. D503 eventually submits to the operation. This is the novel's most brutal reversal. The man who discovered desire, jealousy, secrecy, love, guilt, fear, and rebellion is emptied out. The inner disorder that made him human is surgically neutralized. After the operation, he can describe terrible things calmly. He no longer feels the emotional meaning of what has happened. The state has not merely forced him to obey. It has altered the part of him that could resist. He then betrays I-330 and the rebels. He gives information to the benefactor. I-330 is captured and tortured. D503 watches, without the anguish he would once have felt. She refuses to confess, maintaining her defiance even under suffering. That contrast is the emotional knife of the ending. I-330 remains spiritually unconquered, even when physically overpowered. D-503 survives, but the self that had begun to awaken inside him has been destroyed. The final D-503 is not the same person who trembled, desired, dreamed, and broke rules. He has become functional again. He has been restored to the system. But that restoration is the horror. The one state has not fully won everywhere. The rebellion continues beyond the wall. Disorder still exists. The city is not completely secure. The future remains contested. Yet for D-503 personally, the tragedy is almost complete. He has been returned to obedience at the cost of his soul. The book ends not with liberation but with a terrifying question. If a regime can make people grateful for the destruction of their own inner life, how many would choose the cage because the cage feels safe? The main characters inside the plot. D-503 begins as the perfect citizen because he has confused obedience with happiness. He is intelligent, disciplined, technically brilliant, and emotionally underdeveloped. His tragedy is not stupidity. It is loyalty to a system that has taught him to fear his own humanity. I-330 is the force that breaks him open. She is rebel, seducer, strategist, and symbol. She does not simply represent romantic temptation. She represents everything the one state cannot tolerate: secrecy, irony, erotic power, imagination, danger, and the possibility of saying no. O90 is the emotional counterweight. She is tender, vulnerable, and maternal. Through her illegal pregnancy, the novel shows that even the most basic human desires become crimes under total systems. O is not politically grand, but her wish to have a child becomes one of the book's clearest acts of resistance. R13 shows how art can be domesticated by power. As a state poet, he represents creativity turned into service. He has personality, but his public function is propaganda. His presence reminds the reader that tyranny does not always abolish art. It often recruits it. The benefactor is the human face of the one state's cold logic. He does not need to appear constantly because his power is everywhere. He represents the terrifying calm of authority that believes control is mercy. 4711, the guardian figure who shadows D-503, embodies surveillance made personal. He is the reminder that in the one state, even private confusion has an audience. The central conflict inside the plot. The central conflict is not simply D-503 versus the state. It is D-503 versus the part of himself that still wants the state to be right. That is what makes the novel stronger than a simple political allegory. D-503 is not a free man trapped in a prison. He is a conditioned man who experiences freedom as pain. The one state offers certainty, safety, order, and relief from choice. I-330 offers danger, desire, contradiction, and the possibility of becoming an individual. The battle is therefore internal before it is political. D-503 has to decide whether being alive is worth being unstable. The turning points inside the plot. The first major turning point is D-503's meeting with I-330. Before her, his world is mathematically complete. After her, he begins to experience emotions that do not fit the state's categories. The second is the visit to the ancient house. This exposes him to history, opacity, and forbidden atmosphere. It shows him that human life once had texture. The state has deliberately erased. The third is his discovery of Mephi and the world beyond the green wall. At that point, rebellion stops being a vague disturbance and becomes an organized alternative. The fourth is O90's pregnancy and escape. This transforms rebellion from seduction into moral responsibility. D-503 is forced to protect a real human life against the rules he once worshipped. The fifth is the failed integral uprising. The state's machine becomes the battlefield, and D503's divided loyalties help expose the fragility of revolutionary hope. The final turning point is the Great Operation. Once D503 undergoes it, the novel shifts from psychological struggle to spiritual defeat, the emotional journey inside the plot. The story begins in false peace. D503 feels safe because he has never been fully awake. His certainty is not wisdom, it is conditioning. Then comes disturbance. I-330 creates fascination, shame, desire, jealousy, and fear. D503 experiences these feelings as illness, because the one state has trained him to believe that emotional complexity is a defect. Then comes rupture. He learns that the world is larger than the state, that the green wall is a lie, that love can be illegal, and that the integral can be turned from imperial machine into revolutionary weapon. Then comes collapse. The rebellion fails, the state retaliates, and D503's imagination is surgically removed. The emotional journey ends with the most chilling outcome. Not death, but the loss of the part of him that could understand why death might be preferable to spiritual emptiness. The ending explained. The ending of We is devastating because D503 does not escape. He is operated on, emotionally neutralized, and returned to the logic of the one state. He betrays I-330 and watches her torture without the inner agony that would have once proved he was still human. I-330 refuses to break. That matters. The state can capture her body, but it cannot make her inwardly consent. D503 is the opposite. His body survives, his social function survives, and his technical usefulness survives. But the awakened self inside him is gone. The ending means that tyranny's greatest victory is not making people afraid. It is making them incapable of imagining anything else. The story anchor. The strongest image in the book is the green wall breaking. For the whole novel, the wall has separated mathematical civilization from wildlife. When it cracks, birds and nature enter the glass world. The state's sealed reality is punctured. That moment captures the entire novel. No system, however rational, can fully abolish life. But the state's response also captures the warning. When life breaks in, power does not calmly reconsider itself. It reaches for surgery, punishment, and deeper control. If you only remember 3 ideas. First, a perfectly controlled life is not the same as a good life. The one state removes uncertainty, but it also removes privacy, love, imagination, motherhood, risk, and individuality. Zamyatin shows that a life without disorder may also be a life without meaning. Second, the soul often appears first as a malfunction. D503 does not experience awakening as inspiration. He experiences it as illness, panic, and contradiction. The book understands that freedom can feel terrifying to someone raised inside obedience. Third, tyranny survives by redefining humanity as sickness. The Great Operation is the novel's most horrifying invention because it treats imagination as a medical defect. Once a regime can call the soul a disease, cruelty can present itself as care. The sentence that explains the entire book. We is the story of a man who discovers he is human too late to save himself from a world that calls humanity an illness. Why this book still matters. We still matters because modern control rarely announces itself as evil. It often presents itself as efficiency, safety, optimization, transparency, health, convenience, and collective good. That is exactly why Zamyatin's novel remains powerful. The one state does not only threaten citizens, it offers them relief from the burden of being individuals. The book also matters because it helped shape the modern dystopian tradition. Britannica describes dystopia as a modern genre strongly associated with Zamyatin's We, and later works such as Huxley's Brave New World and Orwell's 1984 are often discussed as following its path. Where the book is weakest. The book's weakness is also part of its historical position. Its world can feel more symbolic than fully realistic. The one state is almost too clean, too geometrical, too perfectly rational. Real tyranny is often messier, more corrupt, more arbitrary, and more stupid than Zamyatin's mathematical nightmare. That does not make the novel wrong. It makes it focused. Zamyatin is not trying to document every form of authoritarianism. He is isolating one terrifying possibility: a society where reason becomes an idol and the human being is sacrificed to the system. What most people misunderstand about this book, the shallow reading, is that we are simply anti-government or anti-communist. The deeper reading is that it is anti-totalizing. It attacks any system that tries to reduce the human being to one approved pattern, whether that pattern is political, technological, moral, scientific, corporate, or social. The enemy is not mathematics itself. The enemy is mathematics used as a substitute for the soul. What the internet gets wrong about this book. Online summaries often treat We mainly as the book that inspired 1984. That is useful for search, but it undersells the novel. We is not merely a prototype for later dystopias. It has its own psychological terror. Orwell's nightmare is heavily political. Huxley's is heavily consumerist and biological. Zamyatin's is more intimate in one crucial way. It shows a man discovering inner life and trying to crawl back into the machine because freedom hurts. The tailor-tailored interpretation. The tailor-tailored reading is this: We is about the danger of becoming so well adjusted to a broken system that your own instincts feel like betrayal. D503's tragedy is not that he lacks intelligence. He has plenty of intelligence. What he lacks is sovereignty over his own inner life. That is the modern warning. A person can be productive, disciplined, approved, and useful while still being spiritually owned. The cage becomes strongest when the prisoner calls it clarity. The real-life test. The real-life test of we is simple. Where have you started calling your own instincts irrational because they threaten the system you are inside? This can happen in careers, relationships, institutions, politics, social media, and family structures. People often do not betray themselves all at once. They do it by repeatedly choosing approval over truth. The book asks whether your life is actually ordered or whether it is merely managed. How to apply the lessons without turning them into a fantasy. Do not turn we into a vague slogan about being free. Apply it practically. Notice where your behavior is controlled by fear of visibility. Notice where you perform agreement to avoid isolation. Notice where you treat imagination as irresponsible because it would force a decision. Then test reality. A controlled life may feel safe, but if it requires you to become less honest, less alive, less brave, and less capable of love, the price is too high. Who should read this book? Read We if you like dystopian fiction, political fiction, psychological collapse, surveillance stories, or novels about the individual against the machine. It is especially useful for readers interested in 1984, Brave New World, The Handmaid's Tale, Fahrenheit 451, or modern debates around technology, conformity, and state power. It is also worth reading if you are interested in how authoritarian systems do not only control behavior, but language, desire, imagination, and self-perception. Who should ignore this book? Ignore it if you need warm characters, naturalistic realism, or a conventional thriller plot. The novel is strange, symbolic, fragmented, and sometimes deliberately disorienting. D503's narration can feel unstable because his mind is unstable. Readers who want clean heroism may also struggle with it. D503 is not a simple freedom fighter. He is a frightened, divided man who partly wants his own chains. 5 questions to test whether you actually understood this book. Why does D503 experience freedom as illness rather than liberation? What does the green wall protect the state from? Danger, truth, or comparison? Does I-330 love D503? Use him, or both? Why is O90's pregnancy one of the most important rebellions in the novel? What is more frightening at the end? I-330's torture, or D-503's inability to care? The final lesson. The final lesson of We is that the human soul does not always announce itself heroically. Sometimes it appears as anxiety, desire, jealousy, doubt, longing, imagination, or pain. Those things can disturb a controlled life, but they also prove that something living remains. D-503's tragedy is that he discovers this too late. He touches freedom, but cannot bear its cost. So the state gives him peace by removing the part of him that could suffer. That is the nightmare Zamyatin leaves behind. A world where the machine does not need to kill every rebel because it can teach people to call their own humanity a defect.